Welcome back, everyone, and we're delighted to have you with us for this very important first part of two, looking at ultimately how do we move forward as a global community of tourism. We're talking about the uniting voice, and it's bringing that uniting and united voice together to speak at a regional level in this first session. We're going to be reflecting on the long view. How do we make sure that indeed we all work together, collaborating, cooperating, and making sure that we carry one voice to build forward the future of one global tourism industry. I'm very excited to welcome to the virtual stage some very, very dear friends and colleagues from the industry itself. First, we have Gloria Guevara, CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, the WTTC, who I must say, in the spirit of the Resilience Summit, is probably one of the most resilient people we know right now, as she has been working tirelessly to make sure that the industry works forward at a global level. We then look regionally, and we have with us as well, very much from the European side, Eduardo Santander, the CEO of the European Travel Commission. Welcome, Eduardo, for joining us, and thank you. Mario,
thank you for having me.
Dr. Hardy, thank you for joining us from Asia, the CEO of the Pacific Asia Travel Association. And we have the CEO from Latin America Travel Association, Danny Callahan. Thank you very much for joining us, Danny. To all of you, we are very grateful for your being with us at this moment. I'm going to hand over the virtual stage to Gloria. Madam, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for the invitation, and what an honor to share this platform with the friends and colleagues that will follow after me. I would like to share a global perspective and have a presentation, a couple of slides to share with the audience about what we believe is happening, and the most important, how do we move forward and recover. If we move to the next slide, please. WTTC, as probably you all know, represents the global private sector. We have a little bit over 200 CEOs from around the world. But what's interesting is that we covered all the industries and all the geographies, from airports, airlines, cruises, hotels. 30% of our members are in Asia, 30% in Europe, and 30% in America, and 10% in the rest of the world. We do a lot of research, and in the next slide, you will see the numbers from last year. As you will see in the chart below, for 9 consecutive years, travel and tourism outpaced the growth of the economy. While the economy in average globally grew 2.5%, travel and tourism grew 40% more and reached 3.5%. Our contribution to the world is 10% of the global GDP and employed 330 million jobs, which is 1 in 10. And from all the jobs created last year, 1 out of 4 were in our sector. What's very important is that in the last 10 or 20 years, this sector has been growing significant. And that's why we have seen the impact of COVID so relevant around the world. If we move to the next slide, I'll share with you some scenarios that we just published. At the beginning, we did an analysis of how many jobs were impacted in travel and tourism due to COVID. And the situation, as this started, as we know, in China, then moved to the largest region of the world, Europe, and of course, Asia, Europe being impacted, and after that, America has been significant. Based on our estimation, the first number was 50, then we reached 100. But unfortunately, now the almost 100 million jobs impacted is only the base case, and is the base case scenario, which means that that number can grow if we don't implement the right measures, if we don't remove the travel barriers, and if we don't support the sector. These 3 scenarios cover the restoration. If we remove some, for instance, some restrictions in June, and we see some travel recovery in Europe during the summer, we maintain that scenario. However, if we have the travel bans and we don't have travel insurance, and if we don't have the support, this number can almost double to 197 million jobs, as you will see here in these 3, unfortunately, scenarios. If we move to the next slide, you will see that we produced a report last year, because for WTTC and our members, it's very important to understand how crises are impacting our sector and learn from the past and be prepared. As we know, we were not prepared for this one, but we're trying to learn experiences from the past. We compared how we were able to recover 9/11 versus 2008, which were the largest 2 shocks or crises that we had previously, and of course the outbreaks. A lesson learned from 9/11 based in our report that you can download, of course, from our website if you want to see more details, is that we need to work together and the protocols have to be the same. Unfortunately, 9/11, it took more than 4 years to recover because the protocols were different. Every country worked on their own without input from the private sector. And even 19 years later, the screening at the airports and the safety protocols are different. That created at the beginning a lot of confusion, a lot of concern for the travelers, and that created, of course, to have a recovery that it was very slow. The difference with 2008, where we have a coordinated approach, working public and private sector and within countries, it was faster. And of course, when we see outbreaks like SARS, MERS, and Ebola, that we recover and we were able to travel despite that we didn't have a vaccine, that's because we were able to isolate the people infected. Now we know this virus is different, and that's what testing and contact tracing is so important. So if we move to the next, 4 points that are very important from WTTC, based on the learnings from the past, based on the information from the present, and how we are learning as we speak from the situation. We need to have a coordinated approach to reestablish operations, remove travel barriers, and reopen borders. That is crucial, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, and Eduardo and Mario will cover probably that in their interventions about the corridors and the regions, of course. We need to look at the travel experience and look at, okay, there will be a before and after the vaccine. After the vaccine, perhaps it's going to be easier because we'll have the vaccine in place and it's going to be easier to travel, but we cannot afford not to travel without a vaccine. So we need to have a process in place that includes testing, contact tracing, and we can isolate the sick people. And then we need to continue the support for travel and tourism during the recovery. We need to have promotion to restore that, and the protocols. Protocols are key and they have to be standard throughout the world. My last slide pretty much covered, the next one please. What is it that we have as safe travel? Why in the private sector we took the initiative to learn from the past, learn from the current experience, and define these global protocols. We started with hospitality, with the hotels that have offered rooms to doctors and nurses around the world during this pandemic, and maintain those facilities COVID-free. That lessons learned and those protocols went to the protocols for hospitality. And we have announced multiple protocols. And at the same time, we announced a stamp so the travelers can identify the destinations and the different players that they have implemented these protocols. At the end of the day, the goal is to rebuild and reestablish the confidence, trust, the confidence of that traveler that can help us to move forward and recover the millions of jobs that have been impacted. I'll stop right here. Thank you, Anita, and thank you everyone for having me. And this was just a quick brief of our global view.
Gloria, thank you very much. And I must say your presentation is quite intense from the point of view of the scale of the challenge we face, but also the different links in the experience chain that are going to be critical to ensuring that we can indeed come out of this as a stronger tourism community and a stronger sector itself. And I'd like to take your global perspective and now go to a regional perspective. And we'll start from the east and then we'll move west. But I'd like to start with Dr. Hardy. Mario, if you can please share with us, hearing what you've heard from Gloria's perspective in terms of the global approach, can you please take us through from an Asian perspective what has been happening on Pata's side? Oh, we've lost your audio.
My apologies. I forgot I put myself on mute. Thank you very much, Anita, and Gloria, good presentation as always. Good summary. In terms of Asia, what's been happening at the moment is countries like Vietnam were actually the first one in the region to really restart domestic tourism very successfully. Most hotels across the country are actually full, attractions are actually up and running again, people are moving about, and the country is nearly COVID-free. Very, very few cases left actually in Vietnam itself. Thailand just reopened 2 weeks ago for domestic tourism. Our favorite place is sold out until the end of the month, so can't enjoy it for another couple of weeks. But many of the 8 destinations around the city of Bangkok that have been open, 8 resort destinations have been open 2 weeks ago. We're actually starting to fill up quite quickly over the next couple of weeks as people want to exit the city over the weekend and spend a few days in nature, near the beach, the mountains, and etc. Other parts of the country are gradually starting to reopen also for domestic tourism. Regional tourism has not started yet. It is expected it will start in mid-July. Other countries around the region also are restarting to open domestically. But again, most borders are actually still closed at the moment. No regional travel, no international travel for the time being. Starting from mid-July onward, some countries around the region are now starting to think about reopening, possibly to bilaterals or bubbles or corridors, as Gloria mentioned before, between countries. I know that our Prime Minister in Thailand is actually speaking today, or was speaking today, with Vietnam, with Singapore, with Japan, Korea, and Chinese Taipei also, as potential corridors to reopen with Thailand in the coming weeks or months. The big question is we don't know when exactly. We know that regional flights and domestic flights will start around mid-July, at least for Thailand. Other countries are also exploring either July or August for soft reopening in certain destinations.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's interesting to see how the region, which ultimately was at the start of the whole process of COVID-19, is slowly starting to build up that confidence that, as Gloria said, is absolutely vital. If we move now from Asia and we go to Europe, Eduardo, what can you share from your perspective?
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you, Gloria, for the comprehensive presentation. And Mario, always a pleasure to sit in the same panel with you. Well, Europe has been hardly hit. I mean, you know how devastating the crisis has been for, for the European summer. We are facing the issue that the European summer should have started already, and there is no flights flying yet. There is not enough demand out there, and definitely there is not enough confidence. And that word I would like to underline, because I think we have passed from a sanitary crisis, from an economic crisis, and now we are in a confidence trust crisis, in particular when it affects, the travel and tourism industry. When I say that, is that, we have created, due to the lack of coordination and collaboration and also trust in, in the different institutions, the different organizations advocating, for the right thing to do, we have created a lot of confusion and frustration among the end consumers, with very hard implications, because although many of the destinations in Europe are very safe, many of them completely COVID-free, there's no demand out there yet, or the demand is so weak that it will not stimulate business enough to survive the summer. So this is the circumstance now in Europe. We have yesterday got some good news, the majority of the borders will be reopening, most probably all of them by Monday, 15th of June. So 15th of June has been called by the German Minister of Tourism the day for tourism. It should be like the day when everything reopens again, and there will be a sort of campaigns again of stimulating. Some of the campaigns are going to be run by us to stimulate not only demand, but the wanderlust, and again, some creating trust and confidence among frequent but also new travelers. Because the question that I am asking myself is not only this summer, but what is going to be tourism after all of this. And I think it's a question that's not only valid for Europe, but it's valid for Asia, it's valid for the Americas, and it's valid for the whole global tourism community. Because we have touched something very, very deep in people's souls, which is that kind of safety. Nobody wants to go on holiday. There's not that kind of absolutely certainty of being safe. I always say that tourism is based on certain facts. It can be the weather, but it can be the circumstances, and certainly safety, that you're going to be fine and you're not going to be suffering on holiday. That's one of the facts that people want to know for sure. So yeah, a lot of light finally at the end of the tunnel. Where there's light, there's hope. I think we're going to be able to save the summer partially. I don't think that a fully recovery this summer is going to be possible, just to be very realistic. Some business have disappeared already, and they will never come back. And now I think it's our job and our responsibility, to help also with the recovery plans. There is a huge endeavor here at the European Union level, to help tourism, with 22% of a huge budget that the European Union has created, for the recovery for the after COVID-19 era. And we are very glad to announce that, that money is starting to arrive to the country, started to arrive to the entrepreneurs, and, to many SMEs and family-owned businesses. Because let's not forget that in Europe, and mostly all around the world, business in tourism are very small enterprises, family-owned B&Bs, and small rental bikes company on a shore in a beautiful coastal town, and so on and so on, all the value change behind that. So imagine, all these people are not only waiting for the summer, but are waiting, for a real perspective for the future, because they think, okay, we were so vulnerable. Obviously we've heard from Gloria, how resilient tourism has been from a historic point of view. We overcame all crises before, but the question is, are we fit to overcome this one in the properly manner, thinking about future generations, future about the young people behind, and thinking about also not to forget the small ones, but also the medium size and the big ones, because everybody here is involved now. It's affecting all of us. It's unifying everybody in the sector, obligating us to look in the same direction, I think, for the first time in history.
It's very true, because it's the first time we've ever, as a global community, been facing, and not just from an industry perspective, but an invisible crisis that is impacting everyone at a health level and economic, and now in travel and tourism. And to your point, all of us must come through this. If we don't all win, we all lose. That's quite clear. We now shift and we go further west, and we go into Latin America. And please, can you share, Danny, from your perspective?
Yes, thank you, Anita. Latin America is somewhat further behind the curve than certainly Mario and Eduardo's parts of the world. We're, parts of Latin America very much still in the throes of, a very crippling pandemic. And, there are some systemic issues there. There are some governmental issues around, I won't name particular countries, but it doesn't, you don't need to be too clever to work out which ones have been the real problems in Latin America and continue to be the real problems. And I think, what we saw was that when the crisis started to hit, we saw countries close their borders quite quickly. And I think that was partly a recognition of the fact that because they were behind the curve, they were able to see what was happening in the rest of the world, and that was quite an important step to take. I think there was also some concerns amongst governments about the resilience of their healthcare systems, because certainly compared to, to Europe, that it's really rather different over there, and the sort of resources they have. And I think at the moment it's still a very, very difficult situation. Most borders are closed. One of the problems that we're trying to deal with at this precise moment is that where we have one or two countries that are heavily impacted, that's being sort of touted worldwide by the media as Latin America, and that really isn't the case. And it's a huge piece of real estate, and to lump them all into one and to say that this is a Latin American crisis is entirely unfair. So we're working hard to try and break those perceptions and make sure people understand that whilst there are individual areas of concern, it certainly doesn't across the whole continent. And I think it's, what we've been doing as LATA is encouraging, we've been working with the tourism boards to encourage them to work together to really to come out of this crisis, and in lots of different ways. And we're certainly encouraging them to look at standardization of protocols and health procedures as and when restrictions can lift, because in Latin American tourism is certainly coming from Europe, is heavily dependent on multi-destination tourism. And certainly if you get up into Central America, where you have obviously a number of small countries, many tourists will do 3, 4, 5 countries on a trip, but we can't have a situation where those trips become impossible because of terrible trouble crossing borders. So it's really important that they work together, and we are seeing some progress in that, and also in terms of remarketing Latin America when it comes out, making sure that we remark it as a unified continent, not as individual countries. And I think that's really important. But one thing that we've been trying to address separately from this goes to, Eduardo talked about how this crisis has hit the soul of the consumer, and it has really fed on their fears and their safety fears, but I think it's also really hit the souls of the trade as well. And we've seen, not just in Latin America, but I think globally, that in places the trade has turned on itself in times of fear. You know, I think it's tempting to believe that because we've been through 9/11 and recovered, we've been through 2007, 2008 and recovered, that we're in some way fit to recover from this. And I think I don't think that really applies, because we've never seen anything like this before. We've never seen a global absolute stop on tourism. And I think that's really fed into people's fears about their future, their family's future, their businesses. And it's, you know, it has been noticeable that, you know, companies have tried to sort of isolate themselves economically. You know, there's been issues worldwide with things like refunds. But I just think there's been a lot of strain in the supply chain in terms of people working together, or not working together, not talking to each other. I mean, I put out a plea to LATA's members many weeks ago saying, look, this is a situation where you need to talk to each other. That's the most important thing, is to talk. You know, no one is going to think badly of you if you say, look, I'm in trouble here. My business is struggling. I need some help. Because everybody's in that situation. And I think it's human nature to try and shy away from that level of honesty. I think there's, you know, in normal business, you wouldn't admit that your business is struggling, because it tends to become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of what happens thereafter. But at this stage, we've been really keen to make sure that people talk to each other, that we can work together. You know, we're holding an online event for our members next week, where we're trying to look at how the supply chain works together to create a situation that is not only acceptable for other members of the trade, but is ultimately a piece of something that customers want to buy. Because there's no point you know, we have to take into account the whole customer journey, from dealing with a tour operator to flying to staying in accommodation, and what that whole thing looks like. And just about how we build in the flexibility that we're going to need for the future, we're going to have to pass on to customers, I think, to engage with them. And I think also one thing that's, you know, I think we have to talk about is that we have to share the pain. You know, this is not going to be a pain-free exit from this crisis for anybody. And I think the best we can hope for is an equitable share of the pain, in a way that allows as many companies to come out of this as possible, so that when things pick up again, you know, we also then have an equitable share of the benefits of that.
You make some really important points that pull this together beautifully, because as you were saying, you're now going through the intensity of the pain on the up curve in many countries, in which, as Mario has said, they're actually on the way through to be able to start to ease on the restrictions, open up, conscious of the risk of a second wave, but at least cautiously remobilizing again. I want to tap into something that Gloria spoke about, because I must say one of the most valuable statistics I've found since the beginning of this crisis has been a stat that the WTTC put out when you mentioned to everyone, Gloria, right up front, that it's 1 million jobs a day. And that brings a humanity to it, because these are lives and livelihoods. These are not statistics. And we get so caught into the scale and the awe of the number without feeling, as you say, Danny, the ache of the number. We have policies, we have protocols in place based on a pre-vaccine world, but confidence is still an issue. All of you have spoken about this. When dealing with an invisible crisis, so I don't know whether it's in my office or it isn't, how do we get through that? Because my challenge with the issue with the protocols and the policies, we operate in a very emotional sector. It's very tactile. The spirit of tourism is engagement. And yet the protocols risk sanitizing, literally and figuratively, that experience. How do we manage that? I'd love to understand, Gloria, from your perspective, because you've been so good in developing the protocol recommendations across the value chain. How do we keep the humanity and the heart in tourism alive while making sure the protocols are respected by not just the industry, but by the travelers as well?
Thank you, Anita. I think what's crucial here and very important, of course, is communication, right? We need to start communicating more from the traveler point of view and not only from the industry point of view. Yes, The protocols, the goal of the protocols, we need to remember that at the end of the day is to rebuild that trust, to rebuild that confidence, right? But in order to do that, we need to explain, over-explain, and over-communicate. So, and then once we communicate, we need to deliver. If I'm a traveler and if I take a flight and they ask me to wear a mask, and in the next flight, they don't ask me to wear a mask, that creates inconsistency and that creates more fear, right? And that's exactly what we face, as I mentioned before, in 9/11. So it is very important to make sure that we implement those protocols and we communicate with the traveler what we're doing. And as I said, we over communicate that is safe. Now, the other thing is that we need to be very clear, and I have been probably too vocal about this, but no one can guarantee anything, not even in my home, right? No one can guarantee safety 100%, not even I can guarantee that in my house. However, if we implement these protocols, you can reduce the risk by a very significant number, and that's why we work with health experts, and that's something that we need to communicate more to the traveler. But then we have the other portion, because it's not only the protocols alone. The protocols by itself, they don't work only, right? We need to have the other components. The other component is the travel experience. How do we make sure that we include the testing, contact tracing component? And some countries are ahead of the game and some countries are behind. As you have seen, we heard, for instance, from some ministers, the Minister of Iceland, that she said that they removed from quarantines and they moved to testing on arrival, and they're implementing contact tracing. We believe that's a great solution because they're all going to be able to isolate the sick. In some countries in Asia, we're seeing that as well. In some countries in Europe, like Greece, as I have seen that. But then the third component that I think, unfortunately, has been quite challenging, and here perhaps the representatives of the regions can elaborate also more, is the component of the governments, right? When the governments, they don't work together, and yes, we have a great platform, which is the G20. I'm very happy, and the Minister of Saudi is doing an amazing job helping us to coordinate within that platform to move faster. However, we still see some issues when the countries, they are not clear. When are they going to open? When are they going to remove these travel barriers? That creates confusion. So, for instance, I live in London, you live in London, right? I want to travel, I'm ready to travel. However, I don't want to be stuck 2 weeks in quarantine on my return. So when are they going to remove that? It is the same situation. Where can I travel? If I wanted to go to Spain, I can't because it's not open yet, right? If I wanted to go to some countries in Asia, there are no flights. So when they start building these corridors, these bubbles, these, in a way, how do you say, green zones that they call them in Europe, we need to make sure that we also over communicate to the consumer so that they know that not only the what, that we're providing the what, but the how and the when, which is what's missing right now. And this is something that we need to continue work together as a sector, very united and moving towards the same direction, but provide certainty to the traveler through communication and clear rules and all the components, not only one.
You make such a good point about particularly the issue about guaranteeing safety, that can't be done. And I love the fact that you're mentioning that if you were to come to my home, all I can do is guarantee that I will do everything I can to keep you safe. Because what we also don't want to see is countries competing on safety as a competitive advantage. It's not about being safer than one another. And that's why I think you've hit some really sensitive points about making sure that confidence can be built in ways that are beyond the logic, but that tap into that emotional strength that is our industry. Mario, from your perspective, because ASEAN is unique and it's always had incredible coordination, as ASEAN and Asian countries within ASEAN are opening up, to Gloria's point, how are you finding the confidence muscle strengthening on Asia's side? What's working?
I think that there are unique challenges in ASEAN, across ASEAN or in Asia, that are maybe different than Europe. Is the healthcare systems in each respective countries are at very different levels. We're very fortunate here in Thailand. We have a very, very good, probably one of the best healthcare system in the world or across Asia. Both private sector and government sector is actually both really reliable. It's not the same in every other countries in Southeast Asia, for example. And I won't name which countries, but I think we can all guess which one there are safer than others. And then that's the complication, is that the countries have to agree that they trust each other in their healthcare system that they have done the proper testing of their residents, enough testing across the country, and also at border crossing in and out of the country as well. And that's the challenge that we have at the moment. That within the ASEAN countries, there is not that level of trust yet between the different nations on the healthcare system. And that's going to be the big complication moving forward, and probably why in Asia we need a different model than what actually Europe is doing, where we have these bilateral agreements between the respective countries, where we do have that trust level, where we do have the confidence that the testing will be done and that contact tracing will also be done when necessary.
It's a great point, and I think that leads perfectly then into Eduardo, because as you said, with Monday, the 15th of June, the European Union and the Schengen zone opening up significantly. Exactly to Mario's point, how are you finding that working in a European context in terms of the ability of remobilizing traveler activity based on trust and confidence being part of the proposition?
Well, I think we have failed. I mean, we have to say that it's only the European institutions saying the things that we want to be listened to and to say. The only problem is that the competence of tourism, as you know, within the European Union is not given to the European Union itself, but it's given to the member states, which creates obviously an element again of competition. And the classic thing, if you mention the word harmonization and so on, they hate you. This is my competence, and I manage the budget, and I budget, and I manage, the processes, the marketing, and everything. However, now countries are coming back to the European Union and asking for advice, because they weren't able, obviously, to solve this. At the beginning, the crisis was something very localized. It started in China, then moved to Italy, then Spain. So everybody thought it's going to be very localized, and therefore they're going to be safe. Anita, we have defended three principles here. If we want to really win this battle, we need transparency, no matter how hard it is to say, there are regions that are not able to communicate yet that they are safe, and they should do so. Nobody wants to create another outbreak. Second, coordination. It has been mentioned thousands, millions of times in these days in so many video conferences. But the reality is here, we're still not working really together. Working together is looking in the same direction, no matter what the consequences are, no matter who is going to win or not. As it's been said by Danny before, there is enough for everybody here. The cake is big enough. Tourism is resilient. It will come back. People will travel again for sure, and we will all be benefiting of this, of the revenues of tourism and of the incredible positive sides for people's lives and livelihoods. The third component of this is non-discrimination, and this has been very apparent in Europe. Whereas a lot of countries has been having bilateral, multilateral, bubbles, green corridors, call it the way you want. But this is what's creating already stigma, because why I'm opening my border only to you, so, and it creates some kind of animosity in between countries too, because, while you are not opening your country to my people, I will not open my country to you. So it creates something which is so far from the values of tourism. So our advocacy efforts together with WTTC and
many
others here in Europe, we have been advocating for that principle. If we're going to open, let's open all together. And if we want to keep closing, keep close all together, because otherwise we're going to create a lot of confusion, which is what we have right now. This confusion is creating frustration, and frustration obviously is equal no booking. I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to go anywhere this year because who knows? Who knows? And the reality of it, and let's admit it, nobody knows what's next. And from a safety point of view, we don't have a vaccine yet. That's the true reality of it. So nobody's 100% safe. And maybe nature will do its job, and this virus will disappear the same way it will, but we don't know. And therefore we have to use protocols, and we really greet all the initiatives from WTTC that it is endorses, also UNWTO and PATA. We have been very aligned, but who is not really listening are, and I don't like to talk bad about governments, but it's again, that kind of turning to themselves and say, I'm gonna think only around my people, my borders, and so on. This is so preposterous in just a globalized world. You know, you are no longer alone here. So, and therefore, I think we're gonna get out of here with global protocols. With as Gloria was saying, you know, you cannot just take a plane in Latin America in a different way compared to Europe or Asia. You know, it has to be exactly the same. And therefore, I think we still have 3-4 hard weeks, you know, to put this program up and running. Because otherwise you are not going to lose the summer only, but you know, we're going to lose a year of travel and tourism, and that can have catastrophic consequences, as we have heard from WTTC and their worst case scenario.
Indeed. I love what you were saying as well about the principle of we have to go back to the values of tourism. Yeah. And apply that to all countries, because then linking that to the protocols, as we've seen in some parts of the world, where people's frustration of being locked in and dealing with this invisible curse that's hit us all, that frustration is getting people out again, and it's putting more people now into the risk of a surge of cases. So Danny, as was spoken earlier in this conversation, it's a whole principle of we need to see what's happening elsewhere in the world, learn from that to apply it. Now, you and your region are on the up curve at the moment. What have you seen from a global perspective, from an Asian perspective, from a European perspective that helps you navigate a Latin American challenge now?
Yes, you're right. And I think, you know, being further back down the curve is, you know, it does at least give us the benefit of seeing what's happening elsewhere. I think it's probably still too early for us to take much in the way of learnings from other parts of the world, because you say, you know, Asia is just starting to open up. Europe, we're going to see some movement from next week. So I think it's a little bit early for us to really draw any conclusions from that. But, you know, it does give us the benefit of seeing what works and doesn't work. So I think it also gives us the benefit of helping to instill confidence in consumers if they can see that they can go to, you know, possibly go to Spain on holiday. They understand that it's doable and that it's safe. That it's going to help all long haul travel. And we've been, you know, I think we're quite clear that Latin America is not on the verge of opening up, you know, anytime in the next few days. But we've been supportive of campaigns, certainly here in the UK, to lift the quarantine so that European travel can start. Because I think just some travel starting is what's important, because that's where we're going to learn the lessons of what works, what doesn't work, what consumers will accept and what they won't accept. I mean, my experience is consumers are actually quite resilient. They're not maybe as risk averse as some people worry about. We've seen that when parts of the world have opened up that have been typically closed. I mean, I remember when Colombia opened up from, you know, at the end of the Civil War, there was a huge demand for people to go there. And there is that element of people will offset some risk against the experience they're going to take. And I think we need to remember that and not, you know, not, as we've said before, I think as Gloria said, not sanitize travel to the extent where it's just not worth doing. But it's a really difficult balance. And I think Eduardo made the 2 points about transparency and about this kind of regions opening up all at the same time. And I think
non-discrimination,
there's a real conflict there, because I think, you know, I think it's really important to be honest about the situation. I mean, Latin America's obviously slightly different to Europe in its layout and in the way it's sort of structured and the way the disease has taken hold. But I think, you know, we have to be prepared to say, I don't think you should go there at the moment, but why don't you go here? And I think it's, you know, it's a difficult one, because, you know, no tourist board, no government wants to hear that an organisation that represents tourism for their part of the world is saying don't travel to this country. But I think we just have to be, you know, we have to be open to being honest about it and saying, you know, it's not shameful to say this isn't safe to go to and this is, because it all starts to help to tourism to restart. But I think we have to be realistic about governments worldwide, about the idea of them adopting a single set of protocols and sticking to that, because I just don't see that you can reliably expect all worldwide governments not to go off at a tangent, which is what we see happening too often. I think it's, you know, the lead has to come from the private sector, and I think the private sector has to understand what it needs from governments, and the pressure has to come from within the countries for the governments to adhere to those protocols. You know, as in as standard a way as possible. It'd be unrealistic to say that all governments will adopt standard protocols. It just won't happen. But we need to do our best as the private sector to ensure that governments understand the troubles our industry's in and how they can help to kind of mitigate that.
And you make a great point, and it leads perfectly when I take this back to Gloria, because there could be no one more qualified to champion the private sector right now than Gloria, not only because of her private sector understanding and expertise, but because she comes from government. So to understand both sides is so important. And that's why, as we start pulling this together in the last few minutes, one of the blessings of doing this panel is that, as I said up front, you're not just colleagues, you're friends. We all know each other. We have relationships, and that's been a really important glue that's, I think, helped people work through what has been a very primal challenge. As we pull this together, in addition to the fact that you have the logos on your business cards, why are you each, in 2 minutes each, better leaders because of this time? So when you're looking back a year from now, 2 years from now, at the year that was the surreal time of COVID-19 and moving into the next normal, Gloria, why are you a better leader now than you were at the beginning of 2020?
I think, I'm not sure if I'm a better leader or not, Anita, but what I can tell you is that during good times, everyone can shine, right? And everyone can demonstrate the best skills. During unprecedented times, we need unprecedented leadership. And that's when we need everyone to step up. And to me, this is a teamwork effort, right? So I'm expecting, and I'm seeing this, Eduardo, Mario, and Danny mentioned that. I think it's crucial that we all continue working together, pushing the governments and pushing the sector, because at the end of the day, we all have choices, right? And my choice will be to work in another industry, as my degree, you know well, is in computer science. I can go back to the technology world, same with Mario, I think. But the reality is here we feel that we can make a difference. And there are millions of people out there that depend on our work and the decisions that we make. So more than being a better leader, I would say, gives you perspective also, right? And this is the chance to do as much as you can to step up and do, I guess, the best to try to overcome this situation as a player, and not competing and not looking after one, but more than the benefit of all.
Indeed, and you raise a really good point, because I always think it's wiring. Some people are wired in different ways. And it's been fascinating to see during this crisis who has really stepped up versus who has stepped back. And that's just wiring. But I argue you're one of the most resilient leaders I've ever met. And I'm not sure if it's your point. I do believe it's made you a better leader. It's made you a more tired leader. No question about it.
That's for sure.
But Eduardo, from your perspective, why is this making you a stronger, not just more tired leader?
I think, it's the fact of not avoiding responsibility. We can always do nothing too, that's an option all the time. That doesn't make any change, you don't have to make all the time right decisions. If you don't make mistakes, you will never grow, and you will never grow personally, professionally, or socially, or you mentioned. I think also that we are now talking about the new normal, but, I think it's the new reality, and the real world is, it's a variety of factors, and we've been talking about sustainable tourism for almost 20 years now, and I always thinking in my mind, maybe we need a wake-up call at a certain point. And this has been definitely my wake-up call, that things have to be done differently. We have to live a better world after our generation, and tourism should be part of this encounter of people from all over the world, maybe creating a better society, maybe creating a new forms of economy, and definitely in a more cooperative, in a more coordinated way, but also in my own loving way. I always refer that tourism is something so human that will never disappear. People have been moving since they are on the surface of planet Earth. So, and we will continue doing so. But while doing so, we'll have to be very, very, very conscious about our decisions. And now that we have digital tools, we have knowledge and so on, maybe we can do it not only good, but much better.
Absolutely. And I like what you're saying, because we must not waste this time. And Mother Nature knows what she's doing. There's no question about it. Dr. Hardy, from your perspective, why are you a stronger leader because of this time?
I think once you pass the initial, shock stage at the beginning, which we all, I think, probably faced at some point during this crisis, you realize actually that some of the things that I've been preaching and many of us have over the last couple of years about being agile, using creativity, innovations, moving technology forward, and etc., now are needed more than any other time. And humans are actually resilient, and when I see crises like this, I see opportunities, tons and tons of opportunities to push forward technologies that we've been talking about for so long. Gloria's been talking for many years about touchless environment, biometric passports, and etc. Now we need it to move forward. There are no alternative for this to move forward. And so I'm really excited about the future, because I think all these technologies that we've been dreaming about to push forward will be needed. And I see them moving forward much faster than what we actually initially saw.
So does this mean we're going to have more robots in Pata's offices in the future?
Yes, actually, our robot is actually a little sick at the moment. I think he caught a virus, so I need to get it fixed. But yes, probably we have more.
And Danny, from your perspective?
I would say it's more about, for me, it's more about the fact that our community has turned to us as an organisation to help bring them together, rather than say that we've done anything spectacular. We've done what we felt has needed to be done. But I think when times are good, it's very easy for businesses to exist in a certain amount of isolation, because they don't need to worry too much about what's happening in other parts of the world and what's happening in the supply chain and what's happening to their competitors. And I think when problems like this strike, if you can create a sense of community, then that provides an element of support. I mean, we're not talking about tangible financial support, but there's just this sense of shared, I'm not even sure what the right word for it is, just this kind of empathy throughout the community. And I think, this crisis has created a situation where our members at LATA have wanted to come together, and I think we've been in a position to allow that to happen. But that's it's something we've been working hard on for the last few years to bring LATA on. And I think it's coincided with this pandemic in a way that's just allowed us to be able to take the lead for our sector. So I'm not sure I'd really take any credit as being a better leader. I think I would just say that our sector wants to work together, and we're delighted to sit with them on that, and to try and sit at the centre of that.
Indeed. And it speaks to something that Gloria mentioned about the need is now there, and that's pulled everyone together. So as we pull this together, I think what's been really interesting about this conversation is that there are nuances. There are nuances in terms of timings of where people are at in the world, healthcare systems, as Mario said, leadership alignment you all spoke about, different levels of trust, different levels of respect for what countries are as entities and as destinations. So all of those are changing. We're not in a static environment. And as Gloria mentioned up front, once the vaccine is established and is able to be rolled out, that changes as well how the protocols will respond and how we all connect. But I think most importantly, what only makes us stronger is the fact that we can reach out to each other and say, listen, we're in trouble, we need to help each other. So from the Resilient Summit perspective, I thank you all sincerely for being a part of this conversation. We can often take for granted, and we've spoken for years about collaboration, cooperation, we need to share information, we need to be there for each other. This has given us the opportunity, and it's lovely that it's not being wasted, but rather it's being brought into the DNA of the next normal that we're now going to face. In terms of moving forward, as I said, this was part one of 2 sections focusing on a united voice. And I thank all of our spectacular leaders, Gloria, Eduardo, Mario, and Danny. Thank you for being with us, looking at the long view from a regional perspective, before we then move into the second part, which is about sector leaders, specifically in terms of the sectors within the aviation, within the global travel, tourism, and aviation space. So to you all, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay clean with your hands, stay hopeful. And thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Anita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.